I immediately saw that this shaggy, ragged creature was indeed a man. "Who are you?" I asked.
Storybugs.
Hello and welcome. We are going to pick up where we left off in Treasure Island, written by Robert Louis Stevenson and adapted by Deidre Lycan from the Great Illustrated Classics. And we left off where the captain and Jim Hawkins, they know that these are actual pirates. So they're trying to figure out what they're going to do, what the plan is. Chapter 13. My shore adventure begins. The next morning, I got my first look at the island. It was covered with gray-colored woods, and I could see yellow streaks of land between trees. The hills ran up above the trees until they ended in naked rock jutting in sharp points toward the sky. The island looked gray and sad. As the ship drew closer to shore, the birds flew over our heads, and the waves thundered against the deck. Here's the island. I hated the very thought of setting foot on that island. We had a dreary morning's work before us. There was no sign of any wind, but the boats had to be manned and the ship had to be anchored. I volunteered to work on one of the small boats. The heat was sweltering, and the men grumbled fiercely over their work. As soon as land was sighted, the men began to show their real feelings. Mutiny was in the air. They no longer did their work cheerfully, and I could detect a feeling of open anger and resentment among them. I knew it would not be long before they turned against us. It was clear that Long John Silver was now calling the shots. Captain Smollett detected what was happening and decided to give the men leave to go ashore. He figured that would give the squire, the doctor, and him time to plan their strategy. I decided to go ashore with the men, so I slipped into one of the boats and sat quietly in the back. No one seemed to notice except for Long John himself. He looked sharply over at me from another boat and called, "Hawkins, is that you?" From that time on, I began to regret what I had done. The crew raced for the beach, but the boat I was in had the lead. As we went under some trees, I caught a branch and swung out, plunging myself into the nearest bush. I heard Long John shout my name, but I broke into a run and ran until I was out of sight of the boats. Chapter 14. Long John strikes the first blow. I was so pleased at having escaped that I began to enjoy myself and look around the strange island. I had crossed a marshy tract full of willows and other swamp trees when I came upon a piece of sandy country about a mile long. I examined the little flowering plants and watched snakes slither between the foliage. Soon I heard voices, so I hid under an oak and sat straining to hear what was being said. I immediately recognized Long John's voice. He was talking with one of the mates. This man obviously had not known about the plan, and as Long John described it, the mate answered him angrily. "I thought you were an honest man," he said. "Mutiny is not my style. I'm an honest sailor, and I curse the day I joined this crew." Just then a cry of anger echoed over the hill. Then we all heard one long, horrible scream. "What was that?" shouted the mate. "That?" returned Silver with a sly smile. "That was the last sound of your friend Joseph, another honest sailor. He too wouldn't go along with my little plan." "Joseph!" shouted the mate. "God rest his soul. And as for you, Long John, you're no mate of mine. If I die like a dog, I'll die doing what's right. Kill me too if you can, but I dare you. And with that, this brave fellow turned his back directly on Long John and set off toward the beach. He did not get very far. With a cry, John grabbed the branch of a tree, whipped the crutch out of his armpit, and sent it hurtling through the air. It struck the poor fellow with incredible force right in the middle of his back. His hands flew up and he fell to the ground. I couldn't tell how badly he was injured, but from his groans, I would guess that his back was broken. He had no time to recover. Silver was on top of him in a moment and buried his knife in the fallen body. I could hear him pant loudly as he stabbed the mate. I felt myself grow dizzy, and I knew I was about to faint. I blacked out only for a second. The sound of the birds screaming overhead brought me to. I saw the monster, John Silver, put his hat upon his head as if nothing had happened. Then he simply cleaned his knife and put it away. Stepping over the body of his poor victim, Long John gave 3 shrill whistles that rang in the air. He was calling his men. They had already killed 2 mates, and I couldn't help wondering if I was their next victim. My heart pounding, I ran silently through the bushes. I had no idea where I was going. I only knew I had to get away. I was so frightened I could hear my own heartbeats and feel the sweat as it streamed down my neck. I soon found myself among the pine trees. Here I saw a sight that brought me to a total standstill. Chapter 15. The Man of Treasure Island. There, under the pine trees, I saw a figure leap swiftly behind a tree. I could not be sure if it was a man or a beast. It seemed dark and shaggy. All I knew was that no beast could be worse than Long John Silver. I stood shock still and did not attempt to hide or run away. The shaggy creature came out from behind the tree and held out his hand toward me. I immediately saw that this shaggy, ragged creature was indeed a man. "Who are you?" I asked. "Ben Gunn," he answered in a hoarse and almost rusty-sounding voice. "I'm poor Ben Gunn, I am, and I haven't spoken with another human being for 3 years." I could see now that he was an Englishman like me. His skin, where it was exposed, had been burned by the sun. He was dressed in the most incredible rags I had ever seen. They were mere tatters of an old ship's sail. On his waist he wore an old brass-buckled belt. "3 years!" I cried. "Were you shipwrecked?" "No, mate," he said. "I was marooned." I had heard that word before. I knew it stood for a horrible punishment, where pirates would actually put someone ashore on a desolate and distant island. They would not provide the unfortunate sailor with food or drink. Most men in this situation would not survive. But old Ben Gunn was a clever man. He told me how he had learned to live off the berries and fruits he had found on the island, and the oysters and fish in its waters. "Do you happen to have some cheese with you?" he asked. "Many's the long night I've dreamed of cheese, toasted and dripping off a thick slab of brown bread. Then I wake up, and I'm still here on this lonely island." I assured Ben Gunn that I had nothing at all with me, but if I ever got back on board the Hispaniola, I would have cheese by the pound. After the old man asked me my name, he asked me if I was sailing with Flint. I assured him that Flint was long since dead. Next he asked me if Long John Silver was on the ship. Seeing how afraid he was, I decided I'd better tell him the whole story. He heard my tale with great interest, and when I was through, he told me I was a good lad. He wanted to know whether he would be rewarded if he were to help me and my friends aboard the ship. He asked for $1,000 and passage home. I assured him that the squire was a gentleman, and he would greatly reward any favor that would get us all out of this terrible trouble. Upon hearing this, Ben Gunn showed much relief and told me this story. He was among Flint's crew when the captain buried the famous treasure. When Flint went ashore, he took 6 strong mates with him to bury the chest. After 1 week, Flint came back alone. He had killed all 6 of the mates. No one knew how he did it, and only Flint knew where the treasure was buried. Billy Bones and Long John were aboard the ship. When they saw Flint come back alone, they asked him where the treasure was hidden. All he answered was, "Go ashore if you like. This ship sails tonight." So they sailed away, and old Flint kept his secret. 3 years later, Ben Gunn was aboard another ship. He sighted this island and recognized it as the one where Flint had buried his treasure. He convinced his mates to go ashore and hunt for the gold. They searched for 12 days in the sweltering sun and found nothing. Each day they grew more angry at Ben. On the 13th day, they handed Ben a gun, a spade, and an axe, and told him he could stay on Treasure Island and hunt for Flint's money as long as he pleased. Just as Gunn finished his story, I heard the thunder of a cannon. "They've begun to fight," I cried. "Follow me." I began to run towards the shore, while close at my side, Ben Gunn trotted easily and lightly. He talked constantly, but I could hardly hear or understand a word of it. Soon I saw the British flag fluttering in the air above the trees. One look, and I knew this must be where the doctor, the squire, and Captain Smollett had set up camp on the island. That flag meant safety for me. I think that's where we will leave for today. Thank you guys for joining me, and I hope you'll come back for the next chapters. If you guys enjoyed reading that story, would you please click subscribe down below? We read new stories just like this one every day, and we would love to let you know when there's a new story to listen to.